Afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the Soil Health at Scale session. If you're joining us for the session, if you could please take a seat, that would be great. It's so much more intimidating being up here than it is down there, so be kind. My name's Harriet, and I'm part of the sustainability team at Riverford Organic Farmers, and I'm going to be chairing today's session with Iain Tolhurst and Tim Parton. I think most of you, I imagine, sort of like me, come to conferences like this and get incredibly inspired and a little bit awed by some of the knowledge you pick up and the skills people have. You read the books, you listen to the podcasts, and then it comes to a kind of crunch time when you actually have to consider how it's all put into practice. And I often find that my enthusiasm slightly dips at that moment, and the confusion kind of sets in. So what I really hope for this session is that we will kind of understand and exhibit some of the knowledge that these guys have of the more technical and intricate parts of soil health, but also get some really practical insights into how we can apply that knowledge into our own productive systems. And I also think, and one of the things that I noticed when I started at Riverford, I'd just been working on Dartmoor with livestock farmers. I was like, okay, right, who's really kind of leading the kind of amazing soil health and horticulture? And it was really interesting to me that I could think of loads of people in livestock, and I think of loads of people in arable. But when it came to horticulture, there are a good number of people, but it's mostly people like Tolly or Andy or Ash in the audience, and they tend to be at a sort of slightly smaller scale of activity that maybe is harder to imagine replicating as you get to kind of sort of from 5 acres to 50 acres to 500 acres. So one of the things that we really hope to kind of look at this session, might have been a bit of a giveaway by calling it soil health at scale, is how we take some of the techniques that we all know work brilliantly for kind of building soil biology and actually bring them into kind of slightly bigger, more conventional farm systems. So I hope that's the sort of discussion that we're going to have today. Apparently, I get a bit ambitious when given a main stage. And so one of the things that I thought we'd do, if I could have the next slide, please, Barry, is a bit of audience participation. And I have no idea if it's going to work. So if you could get out your phones, those of you that have phones, and grab that QR code off the screen. And those of you who are joining us online, you have absolutely no excuse. You just click the link, people. So support me with this. And I kind of wanted to get a bit of a sense of what's going on in the room in terms of what people's knowledge and experience and confidence with soil health was. So hopefully that should take you to a series of 3 questions, which you're all now really actively answering about what you know or think you know about soil health or what most interests you. And maybe if we could move to the results page, Barry, we'll see some results coming through from people. To our 3... Oh, that's right behind me. I wasn't looking. All right, so our first question was, what are your main indicators of soil health? So far, we've got 4, though we're now on 13 responses. So we've got worms, we've got structure, we've got texture, we've got aggregation, senses, plant diversity. 13 responses. I think we can do better. Like, come on, people. We've got a little bit of intuition, we've got life. No, we're going for a refresh. 125 responses. That is more like it. Worms are still in there as the number 1. I don't know if that's what you guys would expect. We've got cottage cheese. Interesting. 204. We've got drainage. We've got organic matter, fertility, nutrients, water retention, fungi, biological activity, yield, species. We've got a lot of really good indicators for soil health there. Maybe we could move on and have a look at the next question, please, Barry, which was, how confident do you feel applying what you learn about soil health to your farm? That's unless it needs refreshing, that's really sad. That is a really low blue bar down on the left-hand side of not at all confident. So unless that's one person who's sort of answering, maybe that is exactly then what this session hopefully is here to address. We kind of all know what the indicators of soil health should be. But evidently we don't seem to feel, assuming that the system is working correctly, that confident about applying those techniques. And maybe we could just quickly jump to our 3rd and final question, please. All right, can soil provide everything a plant needs without inputs? We have 0 answers currently to yes or no. And I'd like to point out that they don't have to be that the system is collapsed. Is the system collapsed? Right. Okay. Well, the first the first question worked. Let's abandon that one then. Like, everybody made it to question 1 really successfully. It's downhill from there. In which case, well, let's abandon Mentimeter. Hopefully, maybe that's given you guys some kind of interesting insights into what's going on in the audience's minds. And I would love to hand over to...
Harriet, slow down.
Sorry, Guy. This is revenge for me heckling you in your session, isn't it? I'm going to hand over to Iain Tolhurst, who I'm sure many of you would know. He's been a legend of organic horticulture for a few years. One of the few farmers that George Monbiot approves of, which is quite the claim to fame, and has set up a really interesting livestock-free fertility system. So I'm going to hand over to Holly for his presentation.
Right, thank you, Harriet. Right, well, I don't know what's going on in the audience, Harriet says, but I think you're all playing on your phones. So can you just put your phones away now for a minute, please, and pay attention to what we're going to tell you. Right, 296 points up there. Well, I might get around to covering maybe half a dozen of them. Can I see it from here? I can. Right, I've missed one. Right, soil health at scale, an organic systems approach to agriculture. So I want to try and make it clear that we run the farm as a system, and this is really important. I hope this will come out through my presentation today. The farm business, I think some of you already know, but we've been going a long time. In fact, we were originally certified by the Soil Association in 1976, so we're getting close to half a century, and I'm still standing, which is fairly unusual, I know. We've been on the present site for 36 years on the same field, continually growing vegetables in that field for the whole of 36 years. We're producing around 100 different crops of vegetables. We're producing around over 100 tonnes plus every year. We are self-sufficient, primarily, not totally, but primarily self-sufficient. It's very low carbon. We do lots of work looking at our carbon footprint. We're stock-free organic. We have no livestock inputs at all to the farm. We never have. We haven't used any chemical inputs, obviously, because we're organic. We also have all our sales going through the farm. Our farm is small. We're only under 20 acres. It depends very much on selling direct to consumer. So we have a bot scheme, 200 odd customers, and a farm shop, and we rely heavily on the support of our customers. We do advisory, we do seminars, we do farm tours, we do food fairs, and we do trials. So we're not just a farm, but we do live in the real world. We're not supported by any exterior influences other than the farming itself. So we don't own the land, we're tenant farmers, and we rely on the farm for our income and the income of our 4 staff. Right, a systems approach, working with biodiversity and biological systems. And when I first started farming almost 50 years ago, I didn't know about these words at all. I didn't know about biodiversity. I didn't know about a systems approach. This was something which didn't figure in farming at all at that point. This is our farm. It looks great on this picture. It looks much nicer on a picture than it does in real. At the moment, it's very wet. It's very muddy, as I'm sure you know. We are just north of the River Thames. In fact, you can see the River Thames just about in the background, top left. We have 2 fields, one of which is in agroforestry. We planted up some 8 years ago. The other one is not in agroforestry, not yet, and I'm not sure if it ever will be. We have a lot of strip cropping, as you can see. We have a multiple rotation going within that area. Field cropping, primarily staple vegetables. Most of what we sell is staple vegetables. In fact, we produce around 100 tonnes of staples and maybe only about 10 or 15 tonnes of other vegetables. Garden cropping, we have very extensive garden croppings. We have 2, in fact, we have 3 distinct rotations. We have a field rotation, we have a garden rotation, and we have a tunnel rotation. They're 3 quite different rotations, but they are managed in pretty much the same way. The tunnel crops, around 1,700 metres. This keeps us going in salad crops right through the whole year, including the winter. It's a very important part of a small farm. Anybody who's doing horticulture really needs to have this sort of scale of cropping in tunnels. It's so important for keeping things going over winter. Propagation, we do all our own propagation. We don't buy any plants in at all. We produce half as bare root transplants, peg plants, and the other half we produce in our own substrate, which we make on the farm. So our soil is, to put it bluntly, is crappy. It's pretty low grade. It's grade 3B, some of it's even grade 4. It's a clay loam. It's very stony. We have more than 20% stone. We get people from all over the world come to look at a farm, and they're often amazed at how we can manage to grow in this builder's rubble, as somebody once referred to it as. We inherited a pretty sad bit of land, which was very low in P&K. It had been heavily cropped for many years. In fact, during the war, it was heavily cropped for potatoes, and after the war, it went into hay cropping, continually year after year after year for many years, with almost nothing going back. So we took it on at a very low level of fertility. We had very low P&K indices. The organic matter was okay. It was sort of low, but not desperately low, but it was in a bad fertility situation. So we took some years to get this sorted out. It's very free draining, which is a bonus, particularly in a year like this, but also has its downside in that you lose nutrients very quickly, you can lose moisture very quickly. So it's by no means what you call a grade 1 horticultural land. Horticulture makes huge demands on fertility. It is the most exploitive of any agricultural crop you can grow. And we've had to deal with this over the years through our rotations. So where does our fertility come from? Because we're not really bringing anything hardly at all onto the farm. Soil biology. I now understand something about soil biology, but I feel often very inadequate because the picture's so big. But I do understand that most of what we do is about soil biology, and much of what we're able to get in terms of nutrients is coming as a result of the way we manage and encourage that soil biology. Green manures are a great way of improving soil biology. They're also a great way of maintaining carbon levels. I think sometimes people claim they are increasing carbon levels. You will rarely increase carbon levels with short-term green manures, but you can certainly maintain it. You can provide the engine of growth, which in many cases is nitrogen, through green manures. So green manures are a really important part, but also they bring a whole biological function to the soil. Every different plant has different associations with fungi and bacteria. The greater the range of plants you have on your farm, including crops, the greater the range of bacteria and fungi you have in your soil. The rotation for us is really critical. We inherited two quite nasty diseases on the farm. We had verticillium wilt and allium white rot, so we had to have a rotation to avoid making those problems worse, and we had to have it anyway because we're organic, and that's part of the rules. So the rotation is critical to the way we manage the farm. Soil management is appropriate. We do till. We till quite a lot compared with many large-scale growers. We probably till more than some. No fertilizers for 37 years at all, not even lime. We are lime neutral, we are pH neutral. And as I said earlier, horticulture makes huge demands on fertility, but not just on fertility, it also makes huge demands on soil structure. We are running over our land many times a year with machinery, not hugely heavy machinery, but it's still machinery. The picture, this is what I call our 50 shades of green. This is just one part of our rotation, which is the brassicas. You probably need to give me a 5-minute warning.
I will.
Yeah, very briefly, I mean, I could spend all day telling you about the rotation. You probably can't see it from there, but up here we got the very start of the rotation, which is a 2-year rich clover herbal rich ley, which includes around 25 different species. To that we add, over the 2 years, we add ramule chip wood and we add composted wood chip. And then we go into potatoes. This is the first cropping year of potatoes, year 3 of the rotation. And then we have a green manure over winter. Year 4, we go into brassicas, undersown with green manure. We're using a lot of techniques of undersowing green manures into crops to keep ground cover. Leeks, onions, also undersown with green manures during the autumn. Into year 6, which is root vegetables, which we don't undersow because they're difficult to get out enough anyway in the winter, but we do have lots of weeds, which is a great ground cover. And the final crop is the squash, which we undersow with year 1 and 2. So we have green manures at every point in the rotation. This is critical. So a lot of our fertility is really coming from the green manures. These green manures are able to hold nutrients. It's not about pumping nutrients in, it's about keeping it there. Ramule chip wood, we're one of the few growers crazy enough to even consider this as an option, but we've been doing this now for 10 years. We've had some fantastic results. Wood has got a great future on farms, it really has. We're producing our own ramule chip wood from coppice, which we planted 25 years ago, originally for firewood. It produced more than we needed to burn, so we've now got spare for ramule chip wood. And we're taking around 25, 30 cubic meters of ramule chip wood from a dozen trees every year. And it goes on and on. Ramule chip has made a huge difference to our farming system. this is where we've been coppicing. We coppice every year, but we're on a 7-year rotation. Yeah, this is the application, so it goes on to the green manure crop. It only goes on, we never put wood chip or anything, we never put compost or anything at all on bare land. It only ever goes on to green manure. The green manure can really make better use of those materials. Bare soil is not good for nutrient holding. We get an amazing array of fungi and bacteria happening once we start using Ramulus chip wood. And we did trials, as you can look it up. There was a 3-year trial done with Organic Research Centre looking at Ramulus chip wood on mine and 2 other farms. And we came out with some amazing results. And the worm casts have to be seen to be believed. They really do. We get an amazing population of worms. So bringing this wood in brings in the fungi, which our soil has been lacking. Most soils are pretty much devoid of woodland fungi. And woodland fungi are really beneficial in terms of promoting growth, allowing plants to find the nutrients they really need. And here we have this worm cast. I call them volcanoes, little worm volcanoes. And this time of year, you can walk across our green manure crops and you'll see, on the 2-year lay, you'll see 10 millimetres of fresh soil across the whole site. This is how much worms contribute to soil health. Plant-based fertility green manures, we use them at every point in the rotation. We use them even in tunnel crops where we're undersowing peppers and tomatoes with green manure, so we have a living mulch. We use them in the field between and after crops. Green manures are the mainstay of our system. Keeping the ground covered. So this is the 1 and 2-year green manure lay, which I call the rejuvenation year. I don't use the word regeneration, I use the word rejuvenation. And this is where we're building maximum fertility, building earthworm populations, building fungi, bacteria, building the next 5 years of future cropping. And this is the point where we see soil health go really high. And the very last year in the rotation is the squash, where we undersow this green manure. So from here to here is just 4 years. And if I look at our whole rotation, we have ground cover throughout the whole rotation for about, I think it's 76% of the time. The whole rotation is covered with crop or green manures or both. Composted wood chip, this is coming from a tree surgeon. This is the only off-farm thing we use, apart from seed. It's coming from a local tree surgeon. It's mostly small wood. It's mostly from garden sites. We avoid coniferous wood. Conifers are quite problematical. It's applied to the soil surface on green manures. It's a really good way of utilising min or no-till. If you're on a very small scale, wood chip has got great potential. It improves soil fauna, it improves nutrients. This is a compost heap, which is primarily just waste material from local source. Tillage. Everybody's very critical of the plough these days, and this is my very shiny plough. It's older than me, it's 1949. For those of you who are interested in such things, it's a TS90 series Ransoms. It does a great job. It will not plough to more than 6 inches, so we're not going to deep plough anyway. So tillage is light, it's gentle, but we are ploughing 4 years in a 7-year rotation. Sometimes only 4 or 5 inches deep, but we are ploughing almost every year, well, 4 out of 7. We're using multiple passes with tractors for planting, for ground preparation, for tillage. What we try to do is keep it gentle, keep it light, keep it shallow. So all implements are timed rather than, we don't use blades. Apart from the plough, there is no other machine which has a blade. So we're using very gentle techniques of stirring soil very shallow. It's timeliness. Timeliness is critical. You can undo a whole lot of really good soil structure in just one pass of a machine if you get it wrong. You can set yourself back 5 years if you're not careful. So timeliness is really important. And knowing when you've done damage and when it's time to repair it. This is a critical factor. If you don't know you're messing your soil up, you're not going to know that you need at some point to make allowance to repair it. And our rotation's been really built around the need to keep repairing any small damage that happens. We do damage. We acknowledge that at certain points in the rotation with tillage, you will always get some damage, no matter how light it is. So the idea is to make sure we keep repairing that damage right the way through. Understanding your soil. If you're going to really understand tillage, you need to understand about the earthworm. Study the earthworm. Get hold of Charles Darwin's book. It's still the most important book on earthworms, the most important book on soil management. Look at what he says about earthworms. If you understand the soil from the psychology of an earthworm, if they have a psychology, then you will understand something about what you should or should not be doing to your soil. Understanding soil using ground cover and weeds as protectors and indicators. When I first came into horticulture all those years ago, my desire was to kill everything. Kill the pests, kill the diseases, kill the weeds. Well, agriculture has been trying this for tens of thousands of years. We still haven't anywhere near it. In fact, it's got worse. So I've got to the point now where I can justify having weeds in the system because they are really beneficial. We can see huge benefits from having weeds at the right place, at the right time in a rotation. They're enormously beneficial. And the same goes looking at pests. We can also see there are some advantages in some pests. That's another subject. Monitoring soil health. So how do I know this is good for our soil? Well, I've been watching it very carefully for a very long time. You need to really get down on your hands and knees with soil and really look to see what's going on. You need to get your hands in, you need to get your hands dirty, but there's a lot of modern ways of doing this as well, and we're using some technology. The most important one is the earthworms. And I'm going to brag now, and some of you may have heard me before. We've got around, the figures vary a bit, but anything between 10 and 15 million earthworms per hectare. Now, this is about 10 or 15 tons of worms. This is on land which has been in continuous cultivation for 36 years, with lots of tractor movements, with a plough, gently, and with no chemical inputs at all, and very, very modest inputs of organic material. We're not heaping on masses of compost. We're only putting on the equivalent of about 6 tonnes of wood chip every year throughout the whole rotation. So we're not putting on huge amounts of material from somewhere else. And this is important. You can maintain fertility easily if you bring loads in from elsewhere, but we don't have the option of doing that. With 20 acres, you cannot bring enough in to make that work. So we're working on very small levels of inputs to make this work. And the worm is the key indicator of what's right. And not only do we have between 10 and 15 tonnes per hectare, we've also got a whole range of different species. I think the last count was 7 or 8 different ages, because the age is really important. You don't want just old ones. They're all worn out. You want a young breeding population. We've got all that. The worm population changes through the rotation. It declines as we go through. Once we get out of the long-term green manure lay, it declines from year to year very slowly, to a point where it gets down to around 7 to 8 million. It halves in 6 years of cropping. And that's the point we restore, we rejuvenate that soil through the green manure cropping and the wood chip. The wood chip has really done so much for worm populations. But also, we've had a lot of studies recently. 5 minutes, good. I might finish early. We've had a lot of studies recently. We had AgriCarbon came around the year before last, and they brought this machine, which is called the Earth rover. This guy was looking at TV 10 years ago, and he saw the Mars rover on Mars going around probing. He thought, hang on, why are we not doing this on Earth, looking at our soil? So he developed this machine, and he goes around testing people's carbon. This is deep carbon testing, going down to 1 metre. So we had 180 samples done right across our field from every point in the rotation, but also very fortunately we were able to look at our neighbour's field, which is also organic, but has been long-term, it's permanent grass, it's beef, single suckler beef herd he has, he's organic, it's been long-term grass. We were also able to compare our soil with theirs to see if there's any differences, because my paranoia, and as growers you'll carry paranoia with you, my paranoia was that over the last 35 years we've been gradually depleting our deep carbon. We've been exploiting our deep carbon. So I want to know where we got to. Really interesting, the results we came out, I could bore you for hours about it, but I won't, was that our soil was still in the same perfect condition as my neighbour's soil. The only difference was we had slightly more carbon at depth than my neighbours. So we've actually put more carbon into the deep subsoil. This is 1 metre down into chalk. We don't have soil underneath, we have chalk and gravel. Even at that depth, we've managed to accumulate a little bit more carbon. But I'm not making big claims about massive carbon sequestration, which I think is a dangerous territory to go on to. But what I can say is we have managed over 35 years to maintain our carbon level and possibly slightly improve it. We've managed to maintain our soil bacteria, our soil health, our soil worms, our soil structure, and soil fertility has improved enormously. I mean, we have much higher levels of nutrient than we ever had before. So within this carbon picture, what we came up with was there's 80 tonnes of carbon per hectare, which doesn't mean much unless you think about it in terms of trees. It's 12.5 fully grown oak trees per hectare. That's how much carbon we have down to 1 metre deep. I'm nearly done. Bore you with figures. I'll leave this one out, because what this is really showing is how much carbon we have, but it also shows bulk density of soil, which is really good. Our bulk density was as good as our neighbours, despite the fact we've been tilling it for 35 years He hasn't. So we know that with the right amount of tillage and the right degree of green manures and the right rotation, you can maintain this soil health and soil structure. Right, final picture. This is one that tells me to shut up, stop talking. But I put it up there because this is a red kite. We're very fortunate to have these fantastic birds around. They were reintroduced some 40 years ago, just before I took over the farm. They're very common. In fact, they are our most common bird. And they are apex predators, really, but they're apex predators on my earthworms. And the reason we have so many of these around our farm is because we have a very high earthworm population. But this is biodiversity at its most beautiful, if you like. I mean, to watch these birds is fantastic. And the biodiversity of our farm is a part of the whole picture. I mean, we cannot talk about soil health without thinking and talking about biodiversity. And the whole farm really runs on biodiversity. If you were to ask me 20 years ago, Tolly, what do you grow on your farm? I'd say, well, strawberries and vegetables. Now I'll say we grow biodiversity. And the strawberries and the vegetables are byproducts of that. The biodiversity is not a bolt-on extra. It's not a tack-on goodie. It's a part of the whole farm system. And it's an organic farm system. And I think this is where I think it's really important that we've got this. Biodiversity is the driver of the whole farm. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Tolly. So apparently I really can't resist messing with conventional talk formats. So while Tolly's presentation is fresh in your mind, I was wondering if people had a couple of questions specifically for Tolly before we do a more general Q&A at the end. Yes? Oh, we'll get you next time.
You said that you plough down to 6 inches, and you're ploughing quite a lot, 4 years out of 7. Do you not find then that you get a plough pan at 6 inches?
Not at all.
Not at all. How's that?
We have so many deep... I mean, one of the things I didn't tell you about was chicory. I get occasional fetishes about things, but this one's about chicory. Chicory's a really deep-rooting plant. Chicory and lucerne we use in our long-term green manure. They're getting right way down a metre deep, and they're keeping that plough pan away. The earthworm population also keeps that away. If we didn't have the earthworms, we didn't have the chicory, we'd have a plough pan.
Oh, there we go.
Even 4 years out of 7, because it's not the best soil for ploughing. It's quite clay.
Do you want to hand the mic to the lady behind you? Perfect.
Quick practical one. How long do you compost your wood chips for? How long before it's good to use?
It's about 12 months. We do some a bit longer because we're using it for propagation, so that's about 15 or 20 months. But yeah, around about a year, and that goes on to green manure. It's not completely finished, but it's more or less done. It's got a CM ratio of around 15:1, which is fine. For plant raising, we get it down to 10:1, and it's perfect.
And for things like mulching newly planted hedgerows, how long would you leave the chip before it's safe to use?
Sorry, could you say that again?
For newly planted hedgerows, how long would you leave the chip before it's safe to use?
We didn't coppice the hedgerow we planted. It took about 9 or 10 years before we coppiced it. The willow we were coppicing at 6 years, although it didn't produce much. I mean, coppicing is cumulative. You know, the longer you leave it, the better you get. So 10 years plus, really.
Right, okay.
Johnny, do you have a question from online?
Cool. So we've got a question from Adrian, who just asked what the name of your farm is. They missed it.
Yeah, we don't really have a farm name. It's Tolhurst Organic Farm.
Cool. And then, yeah, we've got one from Maria that says, can you give an example of weeds at the right time and the right place in rotation?
Yeah, well, every year it's different. I mean, this year, as most growers know, it was a year of the fat hen. Chickweed is a fantastically good green manure for overwinter, for undercrops. Really great. I mean, there's such a lot of choice. The important thing is you need a weed seed bank, so we encourage a weed seed bank. We allow weeds to flower and set seed, which is something I would never have done 40 years ago. So having a selection of weeds in the soil, they will decide when it's a good time to be the right plant.
Cool. We have a lady down front in the yellow jumper. And is there anyone in the balcony with a question? Do we have a mic in the balcony as well? Okay.
Thank you. So I'm right at the front here. Hi. This is quite an ignorant question, I expect, but does improved soil health have any impact on pests in the soil, like slugs, or airborne things like leek moth?
Yeah, I mean, soil health is critical in terms of encouraging plants to be resistant to pest disease. We have very low levels of disease, in fact, almost none at all. In terms of pests, the only persistent pest we have has been flea beetle. Things like leek moth, we don't have anymore. We had it for a year or two. It disappeared. We have lots of predators. When they're dealing with leaf miner, that has been much less this year than it was last year. So again, I think we're seeing natural predators come in. The whole system is not just about biodiversity in the soil, it's biodiversity above the ground, which is important in terms of that. So soil health does give you good plant protection, certainly. And the stronger a plant grows, the more healthy a plant is, the more able it is to resist disease. These are things we used to talk about 30, 40 years ago. We didn't really have any evidence for that, but now we do.
Oh, question right at the back on the left-hand side. And if it's maybe easier to get to the lady in the burgundy coat. I think the mic's made it to the back, so we'll go back, then burgundy.
You talked about ploughing at the right time. When is the right time?
Well, we don't plough everything in one go. I mean, we start ploughing usually in middle of March for potatoes. It has to be dry enough to take the plough and the weight of the tractor. We only plough little bits at a time, so we don't plough the whole farm in one go and then leave it bare for months on end. I know growers who do that, and they keep hammering it with power harrows or whatever to keep weeds down. We only plough generally about 3 weeks before we put a crop in. That's the maximum length of time. So we've got a very short window of opportunity in terms of getting the crop in. So it's really done as and when we need it, but always when the conditions are right. Last year, for example, we were late getting spuds in because it was too wet. March was really wet. It was wet right up till middle of April. We were late getting spuds in. There was a yield deficit as a result of that. But that's something we generally try to avoid, obviously. So timeliness is important, and it is really about soil moisture, soil conditions, but also having it ready just in time for the crop to come in afterwards.
And then final question.
Can you talk about how you manage allium white rot?
Allium white rot, yeah. Primarily through the rotation, we've managed to, I wouldn't say we've eradicated it, we've eradicated the symptoms of allium white rot. I believe it's still there. I'd be surprised it wasn't. The rotation, 7-year rotation, will do a lot to rid it, but I think also increased soil health has had a lot to play because crops grow so much better. I mean, we see much higher yields than we ever used to get, and that has helped enormously to keep plants healthy, I think. And the same goes for weeds. I mean, weeds are not anything like the competitive threat we used to have. We can tolerate weeds at a certain point in the crop growth because the crop is already well established and it's healthy and it's able to resist any competition from that weed. It's very much about soil health.
Brilliant. That is a good to temporarily end questions on, and we will turn to a wider Q&A at the end. But it's now my pleasure to invite Tim Parton to give us his presentation. So Tim is principally an arable farmer. He was kind enough to come and talk to us at Riverford last year, and I knew which farmers had been to his session because they all came up to me afterwards and said, "You'll never guess what this man gets up to at 3 o'clock in the morning." So I look forward to hearing more about Tim's nocturnal activities.
I was quite comfy sat down there. Afternoon, everybody. So, if this works. Yeah. So I'm Tim Parton. I manage a farm just north of Wolverhampton. We're a 300-hectare farm, sandy clay loam soils. I class myself as a biological nutrition farmer. So I don't use fungicides. And by the way, I've come from being a conventional farmer, right full circle, I suppose. I don't use fungicides, I don't use insecticides, I don't use growth regulators, I don't use pre-emergent herbicides, I don't apply P and K fertilisers. I try to farm in the heartbeat of Mother Nature and work with her. I find farming when you work with Mother Nature is far easier. I always use the analogy of merrily, merrily down the stream, life is but a dream, and it is when you're working with Mother Nature rather than trying to paddle upstream and fight the current, and she'll always win. We've been trying to beat her for decades, centuries, and she's always going to beat us, and it's just time to work with her. Every field on the farm will have a cover crop on it within a 12-month period, and that is really at the heart of what I do, is having that cover crop there, getting all those exudates back into that soil, making soil, and getting that soil health right up to prime. My average worm count would be about 37 worms per square fork. I say fork, not a spade, not a worm slicing spade, as I've referred to it, because my worms are so precious, I don't want to slice one of them. And my infiltration rates would be about 18 seconds per inch of water, which is just fantastic from where I've come from. I have a diverse rotation as possible. So I grow winter milling wheats and winter feed wheats, winter canola, or oilseed rape as we call it over here, And then I'll have spring cropping, which will be spring malting barley, spring oats, spring beans, spring lupins. Lupins I find are a fantastic crop. They're such high in protein, and why we import so much soya when we could be growing lupins is always beyond me. I also grow heritage wheats. Heritage wheats, to me, are just fantastic because they're only 6 chromosomes. Our modern wheats are 48 chromosomes. Basically, we've bred wheat too fast, and our body's digestive systems can't cope with it, which is why we're having so much problem with wheat intolerance, in my opinion. I also grow wild flower mixes, which is chamomile, cornflower and corn marigold. I grow those because I also grow natural capital biodiversity. I'm a co-founder of the Green Farm Collective, and I can sell that as natural capital, which I've done this last year. We're also set up to sell carbon, and we're just about to sell audited regenerative produce, which to me is so important that we maintain what it is so people know what they're eating. We're a group of farmers that came together to be farmers for farmers, and to basically try and keep a slice of the cake for farmers rather than everybody else having to cut the slices and we're left with the crumbs. That's my train of thought there. Lost my train of thought there. So as farmers, if we all come together, we've got power. And I'm not talking about just the UK, I'm talking about worldwide. If we all stand together, we've got a voice. On our own, we're such a minute of the population, we haven't got a voice. So to me, it's so important that we all stand together and produce food that people want to eat, but making the public aware of the food they're eating, because we are what we eat. And that's got to be so important about what we're producing, but we want the public to demand what we're eating. And that is really what I'm all about with the Green Farm Collective. We can get the public on side and they start demanding high, rich, nutritious food. That's going to make the big changes. It's never going to come from corporations. We've got to get everybody on side, because to me, it's everybody's responsibility to demand healthy, nutritious food. Soil is so important, and I still see all our rivers turning brown, especially with the rain we've just had. 64 acres of soil lost in 6 days, and it's still happening. Soil is so precious. We can't afford to let that go. It's taking all those nutrients with it. It's taking soil. Soil takes so long to make. It's just pure arrogance of the human race to just ignore that and watch it sail down into our rivers, into our oceans, creating dead zones in our oceans. People will often say, oh, we've got a growing population, we've got to feed them. If we're not bloody careful, we're not going to have a planet to live on, so who cares about feeding them? We've got to start being responsible, and it's everybody's responsibility to make a stand and say, we're not having this anymore. We want our food produced in a way that it's going to heal the planet, heal the people that we live in. To me, it's no... I'm really losing my thoughts today, aren't I? It's no... I'll say the word, but as synthetics and pesticides and synthetic fertilizers have gone like that, human health has gone like that, and we can't continue to do that. We've got to start and make a change and demand a change. As I said, I farm as biologically as possible, so I buy in microbes and I brew them up, and I'll also make a lot of compost and make that into a tea and brew them up. We've been killing all our soil biology for the last 70, 80 years really badly, and it's time to put it back, and that's where my biological journey starts, I suppose. I want to put those microbes back. Some people will often say to me, oh, I don't think the microbes will come back naturally. Well, if our gut loses all the microbes, that won't come back naturally. We have to reintroduce them, and soil is just one big stomach. And I don't want to mess about waiting just in case they come back. I want to put them back. I'm an impatient devil, and I just want to get everything moving as fast as I can. So that's my brewer. Very simple. Just an IBC, an air pump in there. I'll put the microbes in that particular one, put a food source in as molasses, brew up for 24 hours, and I've multiplied by at least 3, which is what I'm always trying to do. And that just gets the cost down, and that's because I can do a biological brew like that, and I use it as natural fungicide as well for about £2-3 a hectare, when normally I'd be spending £30 to £40 a hectare in fungicides back in my old life. And that's a massive saving, but it's just doing a better job. For instance, if I have fusarium coming in my wheat, I can put Bacillus subtilis and Bacillus amyloquifascian on. Every paper I've ever written, it always does a much better job. I'll get about 90% control. Fungicides are about 70% control, 50% control. and that'll cost me £30 a hectare. I can do it for £2 or £3 a hectare, and not have that big impact on the crop, not be increasing the toxicity of the food that we're going to eat, and keeping everything natural. It's just natural biology that I'm using in the way nature intended. As I said, I also make compost. I do it on a small scale, which is similar to what Iain does, but just on a different way, because I only need a little bit, and that little bit of compost will inoculate my whole farm. If you always remember, in a teaspoon of healthy soil, there's more microbes than what there are people on the planet. I don't need much to re-inoculate my farm, which is the way I can do it at scale, but still doing the same thing, getting biology to work for me, breaking those cover crops down. So I'm trying to mimic, in a way, what livestock would do by going across grazing. I'm doing it by reintroducing the microbes and growing the cover crops and getting everything working again as nature intended. I have very little trouble with slugs because my soil's working, my plants are well fed, and slugs will only be coming in if the plant's producing a polyamide. The plant will only be producing a polyamide if it's short of potassium, it's short of iron, it's taking in copper. Slugs love copper because that's what helps them make that slime, makes them a slimy slug. So they're always after that copper, which is what's happened. There's always a reason why a pest comes in. It's never just by chance. 9 million microbes per seed, so I'm really big on saving my own seeds. And I'll also do what I call a seed wash or seed clean. So whatever seed I'm actually drilling in the drill, I'll fill a big microbial tea bag, put that in my brewer, and I'll try and wash those microbes off, but also multiply them. So I'm just getting those endophytes working even more for me right from day one. And having our own seed is just so important, and as farmers, we should demand to be able to keep our own seed, and it's so important we keep control of that, in my opinion. I've been biologically farming for probably 14 years, something like that, and having that biostimulant, compost teas, extracts, it's all in the seed trench for me, which is why I adapted a direct drill, so I don't move any soil at all. I just create a furrow, pop a seed in, and let nature, or the seed, do the work as nature intended. It's a drill I've adapted a lot since when I bought it. So I've got a liquid system on the back there. A guy called Trevor Tapping helped me make that. He's down in Devon. So basically I can brew up my biology and compost extracts and compost teas, put those down, and then I'll put some diatomaceous earth because I want to get the silicon levels up in the plant so that cell wall is strong right from day one. So right from day one, I'm trying to make that plant as strong and as versatile as possible to be able to cope with the environment I'm putting it in. I'll also put some nutrition in there. I'll put some humic acid in there to try and get those secondary metabolites going. So that defense mechanism is working right from day one. And I'm just giving that plant, getting it going right off to a good start. I've got a couple of extra hoppers on there because I do a lot of companion cropping with all my crops. And I've also got a broadcaster at the back where I can do fertiliser amendments or again, more seed. It just depends what I want to do with it. I've also got a row cleaner on the front, so if I've chopped straw or it's very trashy conditions, having that row cleaner just sweeps that little bit of straw out the way so I get good seed to soil contact, and then I don't get that acidity going on top of the seed. In my canola crop, I was having a problem because there was a lot of chaff there. We only drill it very shallow, and as that straw was breaking down, it would go very acidic, and I'd be having problems with yellow plants. By just sweeping that straw out the way, I get that seed to soil contact and I get over the problem. People often ask me, have you finished modifying your drill? I would say, I don't know. I modify the drill to get over problems because I always think every problem can be overcome. We just need to think about it. It's only a problem if you let it be a problem. The other problem I had as I got better at brewing, I started to get more and more biofilm within the brews, which is real sticky substance. The string that I have on my air pipe in the bottom is just like mussels hanging off it. And the diaphragm pumps on the original one just couldn't cope with that. It was blocking the system up. So I went back to Trevor. Trevor and I have become good friends over the years. And I said, I've got this problem. Can you come up with a solution? And Trevor, being the engineer that he is, he came up with the peristaltic pump for me. Now, the peristaltic pump is just like a kidney dialysis machine. So it's a very gentle squeezing action. So every culture on the drill now has got its own pump, and I can put as dirty a liquid through there as I want without it blocking up. So I'm getting all that goodness that I was having to filter out before, right in that seed, getting it really going right from the start, which is what the whole my system is all about. I also I'll brew up nitrogen-fixing bacteria and phosphorus-releasing bacteria. I started using biology back in 2012, and those days I hadn't got the drill, so I was just spraying the microbes on, and where I put the nitrogen-fixing microbes on, everywhere I'd applied them, I'd reduced nitrogen by 40 kilos to the hectare to pay for the microbes, and everywhere I'd done it, I'd got an extra ton to the hectare. I thought, wow, I'm onto something here. The year after, I got exactly the same result, but I knew I was still onto a good thing, and I knew biology had got all the answers. We just need to ask the right questions. Biology's always been there. It's just human beings have had the arrogance to think we can make things better, and having to keep meddling with the thing rather than leaving the thing alone and working with it. So that's one of my seeds from the autumn. You can see the riser sheaths have covered. That plant is feeding the biology. It's putting those exudates out. Biology is providing all the nutrition that it needs. The picture on the left is a good friend of mine, and he's a conventional farmer. And I keep trying to persuade him to change, and he knows he's got to one day, but with the financial pressures, he's very reluctant to take a step off the conveyor belt. But you can see his plant is just growing in a medium because he's feeding it everything it needs. Basically, the soil, the plant, it's just a drug addict. He's just feeding it, and the plant's responding. Mine is actually working, which is why I don't have to put all the inputs on to get the better results. And that's basically what I'm all about. But that bare roots, you can see that plant isn't feeding any biology because all the nutrition is available because he's applied it, and there isn't any need for the plant to feed the biology, so the biology is just going backwards. And because he's high tillage, he's just have bacterial soils, not fungi. That's one of my cover crops from the autumn. That's an 11 species cover crop, so I want as much diversity as I can. Different plants feed different microbes, that symbiosis action is going on, so I want as much variety as possible in my cover crops to be putting as much down, and if one plant doesn't do very well, another plant will succeed, and plants will talk to each other and feed each other because you get that symbiosis between plants. Some plants hate each other, but a lot of plants will help each other and share, and it's been proven many times that the more variety in a mixed cover crop, the better the results. That is another one of my cover crops. That's a bean, rye and vetch cover crop. I've used this picture an awful lot, but that's just one bean plant. And that's just showing there's no compaction there. The whole of that plant, the riser sheaths are covered. It's feeding the fungi, it's feeding the bacteria. Everything is working as it can, and I'm making soil, which is what that cover crop is all about. The days have gone where we have to apply organic matter. It's plants that make organic matter. And that's what my cover crops is. My soil organic rates are going up by between about 0.2% per annum, but it's always in a different sphere or horizon of the soil. It's never in the same horizon, it's always in different ones. So with the farm carbon tool cutting kit, I've been doing a trial now for 6 years, and every year it's 0.2%, but sometimes it's 0 to 10 centimetres, sometimes it's 10 to 20, sometimes it's 20 to 30. My only regret is we didn't go even deeper because the archaic worms on my farm, they're going down to about 1.2 metres, 1.4 metres, and they're just black motorways going down, dragging that carbon down. And so we're not getting the full picture of the amount of carbon I'm actually getting back into that soil. I'm always trying to step away from using glyphosate. I do still use it, but I'm always trying to step away. This is what Harriet referred to before. I get up at about 3 a.m. My wife loves me. And I'll go out with a Cambridge roll, and it's my way of destroying a cover crop. I always remember the first time I did it, which is probably 10 years ago now, 8 years ago. And I got up, and the tractor was cold. The rolls wouldn't unfold because the oil was so cold. And I sat there and I thought, what are you doing? This is mad. But I persevered. I got there. I'm not one for giving up. And I went out, and I can get 90% control of all those plants when it's -4 and below. If it's -2, it just rolls it and it does kill it, but -4, I get that lovely shattering effect, so it's just like glass. Then the worms will drag all that organic matter down, and everything's working and it's clean. So that is one of my favourite ways of getting rid of a cover crop. The other way I use is a crimper roller, because especially if I'm speaking south of the country or in Australia or anywhere, they'll say, we don't get frost. I say, I've got my crimper roller. So again, working with Trevor Tapping, I said, Trevor, I need another way to destroy my cover crops. I'd tried crimper rollers. I'd had a rigid one, And the problem was one side would be chopping the cover crop up, the other side wouldn't be doing anything at all. Even though I thought my fields were very flat, they weren't flat enough. So now we've got a crimper roller with 3 individual metre rolls which will undulate to follow the contours of the ground. I've got airbags on it so I can set the pressure really light that you can go across your foot and it would just tickle it. Or I can set it so heavy it would smash every bone in your foot, so I can set the pressure of that cover crop to whatever I need to for the plants I'm trying to destroy. And I can get 3 to 4 crimps because I've got more crimps on the roll than normal. So I can get 3 to 4 crimps, which is just switching off the xylem and the phloem, so it's shutting off the blood supply to that plant. If I do use glyphosate, I'll always use citric acid and fulvic acid. The citric acid lowers the pH, so I don't need to use as much glyphosate. The fulvic acid has got a cation exchange capacity of 1100, so again I can reduce the amount of glyphosate. And then I'll always put some molasses in. Now the molasses will stimulate the biology. If any glyphosate hits the soil, it'll stimulate the biology and it eats the glyphosate. And we've done a trial on farm this year, which we haven't got all the results back, just to prove exactly that when you've got a good biological soils, it does cope with it well. It's not good, I don't want to use glyphosate, but I still prefer to do that than invert the soil. It's just my way of farming, and I want to keep that carbon in the soil. And so the results are coming back so far, it's proving exactly what I said I thought it would do. The trial's been done before in Australia, and it proved it out there as well. I would never want to put glyphosate on a crop that we're going to eat. I think that's wrong. And I think it should be stopped because I don't want to eat glyphosate. But to do it to destroy a cover crop rather than inverting the soil is my preferred way. The other thing that I played around this time is inter-row mowing. So they are my lupins, and I've got a red clover understory. Because the spring was so dry, the lupins really did struggle. The clover seemed to cope with it really well, so it wasn't the best year to do the trial. But the inter-row mower, again, made by Trevor Tappin, worked really well. And it's just me always playing around trying to get away from glyphosate and trying to get away totally from using herbicides. Some years I can grow wheat with no herbicides at all, which I do regularly. Occasionally I still have to use a herbicide on the growing crop, but it's always a work in progress to step away from it. I do an awful lot of sap testing, and I call what I do intelligent farming because I'm using the best of science to make the most informed decisions. So even though I want my soil to provide everything and I'm trying to use biology for everything, with our maritime climate, you can never guarantee that biology can keep working. But I've got to stop in profit because if I'm not making money, one, I'm out of the job, but two, somebody else will take the farm on. Profit has always got to be my main consideration, even though I want to do everything else that I do. Profit has got to be there. And so I'll sap test every 10 to 14 days, so I'm constantly monitoring that crop to keep it at peak performance. And I class it as, it's just like an athlete. I want that plant to have the best nutrition possible to give me the best return. It's a lot of work, but I think it's well worth it, and that's how I manage to farm without using the fungicides and insecticides. There isn't a disease or a pest problem, I don't believe, that can't be overcome by the right nutrition. It's always nature sending the bin men in for any pest that's coming into the crop because that crop isn't functioning properly because it hasn't got the right nutrition for whatever reason. I also do a lot of handheld testing, so I've got a pH meter to monitor the crop, an NO3 meter, a calcium meter. I do a lot of redox testing. And my, God, I'm terrible today, aren't I? And the other meter there, which will come back to me in a minute, bricks testing. So I'm all the while monitoring. So the management of what I do is high, but the rewards are even higher in my opinion. It's like life, the more you put in, the more you get out. That's always been my philosophy. So they're my interim measures. If I've got a problem, I want a quick answer. But it's the sap testing I really rely on now because that gives me all the information I want. I've got every nutrient there and I can work with that and make amendments to keep that plant at full production. That's a crop of wheat of mine this last year, and that had 50 kilos of soil applied N with 28 litres of a foliar N. Just for comparison, 20 years ago that would have been 240 to 280 kilos of N. We normally only use about 50% of the amount of nitrogen we put on the land, so that would be all leaching off and going into our waterways, getting the nitrate levels high in our water and going toward the ocean dead zones with all the phosphorus. So I think that's a real big achievement. And that average 12 tonne to the hectare, I think the UK average for wheat is about 8.2, 8.4. So when people talk that to farm in this way we're going to have lesser yields, it's just not true. And that was £82 a tonne production cost, and I'd sold that forward at £280 a tonne, so you can soon do the maths. We are more profitable the way we are as long as I get the right weather. The springs have been challenging for me the last few years because I just haven't had the water, and it's been so close, a couple of mile away I've had water and I haven't, which has made it hard. But with having the infiltration rates that I've got, I'm holding on to that precious resource of water longer than anybody else. My land is just like a sponge when you walk across it, and that's how I gauge land. If I'm consulted, I'll walk on and I can feel straight away what that land is like just by my feet. I use all my senses to judge land. That's always the best way, and I encourage everybody to go out and do that with your own soil. It's always the best way to judge your soil. That's just a crop that's a few years old, that slide is now, but it's just showing where I always like to prove what I'm doing is actually working. And that's brown rust coming into that crop, which has done quite a lot of damage on the bit that I didn't spray. The rest was sprayed just with biology in Bacillus subtilis and Bacillus amyliquefascium, and you can just see the work that that's done. I do an awful lot with potassium silicate, so I'm always trying to get the silicon levels up in the plant to get that armour, and I do a lot with calcium because calcium to me is one of the most valuable nutrients in the plant, and it's always overlooked because people always look at calcium as pH, and it's got nothing at all to do with pH. Calcium is a totally different ball game. pH is just potential hydrogen, and that's all you're measuring, and that's where people often go wrong. Calcium to me is one of the main elements and should never be overlooked. I had an entomologist come on farm. That was a real fun day because I showed her all around the farm and all my flower margins, and thought she was going to survey the whole farm. She got about 100 metres because they were so busy with insects she couldn't get any further, and she'd never seen insects like it. It was just a fantastic sight. The whole farm is buzzing. We've got bees on farm as well, but to just see the whole farm alive and the amount of insects, it's just fantastic for me when I'm crop walking. I also have a bird ringing club come on farm, so I'm always monitoring bird levels, and you can see the levels we've had there. And I've just had the figures coming for this year, and we've got even better figures this time. We had last year we had a lesser spotted woodpecker rung on farm, which was just beautiful to see. And I also catch moths for Rothamsted, and they'd never seen moth numbers like it off an arable farm, and my moth numbers are equivalent to a woodland situation. But those moths are so important for the caterpillars for feeding all the birds when we're in the spring, which is why I do it. I just like to monitor the levels. But again, it's just seeing that buzzing and seeing that feel-good factor of farm, because you can't help feel good when you're walking and seeing all this wildlife, and I'm making more money. What's not to like? This has got to be the way we should all be farming. Everybody should have the right to it. Let food be thy medicine and let medicine be thy food. And I want everybody on this planet to be entitled to nutrient-rich food. I want the producers to have a good income from it, and that can be achievable. It's only politics that gets in the way. Healthy soil, healthy people, healthy planet. Thank you.
I knew you guys would be cracking to have this conversation with. We're going to do a couple of questions for Tim, and then we'll just throw it open to a general Q&A for everybody and a good chat. But I'm going to abuse my chair's privilege. You guys operate at completely different scales of the kind of farming system and very different kind of farming markets. Has the size of your different enterprises ever made you feel like you couldn't do something that you really wanted to do? Like, I'm sure, Tolly, for example, people have said to you, well, I can't do Ramiel wood chip because on my scale it wouldn't work, or maybe there's a bit of kit that doesn't work for you, or has it ever felt like an impediment? Or to come back to what you said, Tim, is every problem solvable if you put your mind to it?
I think for me, when I first started, everybody told me it couldn't be done. Everybody said I was mad. Everybody said we'd go bankrupt. Everybody said I'd fail. It just made me more determined, because it can be done. And as I said in my talk, every problem can be overcome. We just need to think about it. Nothing winds me up more when somebody says, oh, that can't be done. You haven't even given a chance. Think about it. Everything can be overcome. We just need to think about it.
Tolly?
Yeah, I'd agree with Tim. I mean, when I started this, I was referred to as a hippie dirt farmer, which says, from two actually. And everybody told me I was completely mad as well. I mean, I still think a few people think I am, perhaps, but, you know, when you go into new technologies, you have to believe in what you're doing, and you have to give it a chance to work. You know, there's no good doing it once. As Tim has done, he's been persistent at it, you have to keep at it, and eventually you get a result, either positive or negative. In our case, I think positive.
But you're always learning, aren't you? Even if it hasn't worked, you're still learning. You can learn more when it goes wrong.
Absolutely.
I know that hasn't worked, and there's always a positive there. You just have to look for it. Every single time there'll be a positive.
Right. Who's got some questions for Tim? I see two people sort of at the back, left-hand side, hand waving.
Hi, I've got objections to selling carbon so that people can carry on doing bad things. Is it possible to make a living from farming regeneratively without selling carbon?
Carbon it's not one that I see is ever going to be a big income. It's there, and we've moved on from when we started the company. I see natural capital being the one that people can see it. I sold natural capital to a flooring company in Birmingham. They weren't even interested in carbon, and it's not one that's really on my radar anymore. I'm more interested in natural capital and regen produce because it's
biodiversity.
Yeah.
Because I've got a proposal that if we banned artificial fertilisers or made them prohibitively expensive with a carbon tax, that we'd all have to get on with farming properly and save the planet.
Couldn't agree more. I mean, I didn't put it in my talk because I haven't got time, but I mean, I grew wheat last year just with organic amino acids. So I'm always trying to step away from all these synthetic inputs because it's not what I want to do. And the organic amino acids yielded exactly the same as my normal nitrogen application, but I have to do things gently because it's pioneering work and I can't afford a big boom financially, so it takes me a slow process. My real annoyance is I have to wait a whole year to do more trials. It just takes too long.
Am I allowed another one?
Well, maybe we could pass to the gentleman behind you, and we can come back to you if there's enough time.
If there's a lot of, if you're increasing the water capacity, holding capacity, does it help with floods as well? That's my
water holding capacity, I think. I didn't quite hear, but we'll take the gentleman behind.
Yeah, good afternoon. My name's Mark. I'm from the RSPB. There seems to be, as a non-farmer to a farmer, or to two farmers, there seems to be a constant sort of either with and for nature or around food production and food security. And you spoke about profitability, but I'd like to understand your perspective on what impact that has on yield by doing such great things for habitats and biodiversity versus some of your neighbours who are farming more conventionally.
For me, it's had no impact at all. There's enough room for every inhabitant of this planet, be it insect, be it mammal, be it whatever. There's enough room for us all. It's just managing it in the right way. And we're more profitable than what we were. The farm is alive, it's buzzing, so there's nothing not to like. Everything has got its place and everything does its job. And I think we're all connected to the trees, the hedges, the birds. We're all one, really, if you break it down. And that's got to be the thing, to live in harmony together, rather than thinking we've got the right to exterminate anything because we want to do this. We've got to work together and be in that harmony.
Johnny, are there any specifically for Tim online?
So, someone asked if you could go into more details about your biological fungicides and brews that you make.
I buy a consortium of microbes, so I know exactly what I'm brewing, because at that situation I can't afford mistakes, and I'm always a bit wary of compost teas as the crop goes on, because I make some lovely compost, but I'm never 100% sure what's there. So I wouldn't do a compost tea just in case there was any Legionnaires disease or E. coli. So I always buy a consortium of knowing exactly what I've got. So there'll be Bacillus subtilis, Bacillus liquefaciens, some Pseudomonas. It's a real nice complex blend. I'll brew that up. 12 hours would be my minimum because I heat the water to about 18 degrees. Everything reproduces better when it's warm, so I can get a much quicker brew. I'll put a food source in there of molasses, and when I put it out, I'll put some fulvic acid because I always have nutrition as well to help feed, and just spray it on the crop, but I'll always spray at night when it's cooler because it stops on the leaf and you're not getting that UVs killing the biology. Bacillus subtilis is okay with UVs, but it's still not good. It's easier at night. My phone stops ringing at night, so I can enjoy the job.
Tim, where did you get your idea for that mix from? Because that sounds like that might be something that was like quite academic that you've then made into a kind of process or system that works for you.
I read an awful lot of books. I also work with a guy called Nick Woodjack, who's been doing, he's from the horticultural ground. He worked for Ava Fertilisers, but he's been working in the horticulture and he'd been using biology for a good while. So I always think the right person appears when you're on your path to where you want to get to, if you just be patient. And he just appeared and he just took me that little bit further of where I wanted to be. I knew what I wanted to do, but he'd got the information of where I could get the microbes and what I could do with it. And that's to say, the right people always appear, as long as you're focused on where you want to get to.
Brilliant. All right, more questions. I will take the gentleman at the front on the right.
Hi, that's inspiring stuff. I'm trying to devise a crop rotation for a small farm, and so much information there. It's great. Just a couple of quick ones. And one quick one now, actually. What was the nitrogen-fixing microbe that you mentioned, or microbes?
It's a Zotobacter, the Bacillus subtilis fixed nitrogen. So there's loads that will do it, and it's just, I'd say, just if you're putting loads of nitrogen out there, you're not going to get the same result in my mind, because there isn't the need for the plant to feed the nitrogen-fixing bacteria. So last spring was a really hard one for me, because we had that dry period, then it came so wet and so cold, and then it came dry again. It wasn't the ideal conditions for biology, so I had to go out with a bit more nitrogen soil applied than what I would have done, because it had been washed away. And I need that little bit of nitrogen early on to get enough foliage to be able to feed and get the plant going. But it's in answer to your question, Zotobacter, Bacillus subtilis, there's quite a few that nitrogen fix. It's just brewing them up and letting them do their job. But
I'll take a question from over here, an online question, and then I'll be back to Kate. So, purple shirt.
You mentioned you save your own seed, and I'm a big advocate for seed being at the heart of all agroecological systems, and I know that space, time, energy, skills are often seen as barriers to saving your own seed, and I wondered what your experience of it is and if you've seen any benefits from saving seed.
Oh, I'm a big believer in epigenetics, so I think that plant is always improving itself. I'm not a fan at all of gene editing and messing around. I can achieve everything they say they want to achieve with gene editing just with nutrition. Why mess around with something that you don't know and bring that in? You know, genetically modified never worked. It took them 15 years to develop it. Nature got around it so quickly. Why have we got to keep meddling? And our own seed and getting used to our own environment and adapting to it, it's got to be the way. It's just like us. We're just adapting and getting better and stronger for that environment that seed is going back into it. And by letting it senesce properly and getting those endophytes, because the endophytes go onto that seed in the last 2 weeks of maturity, that seed is primed to go back into my soil. So why would I want to bring seed from somebody else's soil that's probably biologically dead and not going to function in my ground? It's just working with nature. That is the heart of what I do. If we work with it, it's so much easier.
As Tim has just mentioned gene editing, this might be a time to remind everybody that the Food Standards Agency consultation on gene editing ends on the 8th of January if you've yet to make your contributions. Can I have a question from online, please, Johnny?
What challenges did you face when transitioning towards regenerative, both economically and in practice?
I'd done an awful lot of research before I started, so I never had a yield dip. So we've never really had any financial hardship from doing it. I think a lot of people haven't done their research or their soil isn't quite ready to make that big step, and then they get their head in the sand saying, I'm not moving any soil, and sometimes that soil just needs moving to get some air in. If we haven't got air in the soil, we're not going to grow anything, and my biology's not going to work if it's an anaerobic soil, and it's just being open rather than to say, I see it an awful lot where people say, I'm not moving any soil, and you can see it's just anaerobic, it needs lifting. It doesn't need loads of tillage, it just needs some air getting in there, because nothing can grow without air. And so, but the answer to the question, no, I didn't have any financial hardship because, say, I'd primed and me being a manager, I have to answer to somebody else, so I couldn't afford to have that dip. I had to make sure I'd got it right. And I always remember when the owner I worked for had passed away now, but when I was telling him what I wanted to do, he says, I don't understand everything you're saying, but I trust you. So the emphasis was all on me. I'd got to make it work, which made it even more important for me to do the research to make sure it would work, because I couldn't afford the failure.
We'll take a question from Kate, and then we'll just open it up. So questions for Tim, questions for Tolly. I think we'd also love to hear thoughts from you guys, because I can see you all. I know you're all experienced farmers in the audience, so any thoughts or tidbits or things that you've done that work really well for you, love to hear those as well. But we'll go to Kate first, and then more questions, please.
Sort of a follow-on from the previous question, actually. We took over our family farm 3 years ago now. We went from conventional mixed farm over 450 acres to full agroecological approach, zero till, zero spray. We were told by everybody that we should have done it slowly and gently. We went whole hog because, as far as we're concerned, there is no time for that. Who was right?
Oh, that's an how long a piece of string question. It just depends where your soil was. And if your soil's in the right place, it just gets stuck in. You know, if I was taking land on, I'd be straight in direct drilling. I might lift it, but that would be as far as it would go. So it's all getting, I can't stress enough, to get that fork and get to know your soil and see what you're dealing with, because there isn't a right or wrong answer to that question. If the soil was right, it was the right thing to go head on. It's because we're under so much financial pressure at the minute as farmers. I'd always advise somebody who's cautious, just do an area and tell you whatever you're comfortable with, and just get somebody in with a drill that you can do it, but farm it in a regenerative manner with cover crops, and do it over a 3 or 4 year period and prove to yourself that it's going to work. And then you haven't got that financial burden. And everybody needs to sleep at night. And if it goes wrong and you've gone cold turkey and done the whole farm, and it has gone wrong, and I've seen that happen, all of a sudden you can't sleep, and everything, that mental pressure, it's just not worth it. Mental health has got to come into it. You know, people will often ask me, how did I get into all this? Well, I had a big bout of anxiety, depression. My wife worked in mental health at the time. She didn't want me to go on the drugs because it was just like fungicides. It's a sticky plaster for the symptoms. And I got myself tested to see where my nutritional deficit was. And I did an awful lot of meditation work and everything else, but I got better, quicker, and healthier. And that mental health is always so important, and to go cold turkey can create so many problems that you can go from feeling great to not sleeping and feeling crap, and that's just not worth it. You know, not for the picture of your health. You've got to do what you're comfortable with.
Right, open field on questions. There was someone with the glasses there with the tan jacket on. And then, oh yes, loads of hands. Excellent. Johnny, maybe we could run to some people at the back while we're taking this question here. Thank you. Yes.
I would like both gentlemen to comment on the fact that regenerative farming, to me, is about good food as much as organic is about good food. And I'm really disturbed about the fact that glyphosate is being used in regenerative farming, and an awful lot of people, I feel, don't actually know that. Apparently, Minette Batters, in her autumn statement, actually advocated the use of glyphosate in regenerative farming. And I think most people who want to eat clean food don't want to eat glyphosate. And I know the gentleman, Tim, said that it was only used for cover crops, but it gets into the soil. And this conference, to me, is about soil health. And those two things just don't go together. And I've noticed that regenerative farming seems to be a Trojan horse getting into the system, and nobody's talking about organic farming anymore in the way that I understand we need to be clear about healthy food. So Iain is an organic farmer, and Tim has some extremely innovative ideas, and I think they're fantastic. But you're using glyphosate.
Right. Me first, or you first?
And it was inevitable this question was going to come up. Obviously, for me, it's not a question for me, perhaps because I don't use it and I have no need for it. In a way, I can slightly understand where Tim is. We're going to turn him into an proper organic farmer within the next 5 years, because he's going to see the desire for himself to do that, I think. I'm more uncomfortable about the fact that very few people know this is going on, rather than the fact that people are doing it. I think the fact that regen has become a big name in agriculture, and very, very few people understand that one of the keystones of regenerative agriculture is glyphosate, and this troubles me hugely. And I'm not here to vilify my neighbour at all. I respect what Tim does. It's really important we have people like Tim doing some really innovative work, and I really hope that he will move away from that in the future. I think he probably will. It's as the lady points out, it is a serious issue, and we do need to start to understand where we can go without glyphosate, because one day it will be banned, and no one's really prepared for that at the moment.
The big one.
Your turn.
I don't want glyphosate on my food. It's poison. I don't want it on my food, and I think applying it to desiccate crops should be banned. There's no two ways about that. To destroy my cover crops, I work with Andy Neal, who's a chief scientist at Rothamsted, that we've done the trial on farm this year with Wild Farm with Andy Cato. And what we're trying to prove is by stewarding the glyphosate the way I do, and because my soils are so biologically active, it will eat the glyphosate. And my water was tested last year by Severn Trent. I hadn't got any glyphosate in it. But if I don't do the amendments that I do to the glyphosate, I would have glyphosate in my water. So, and we've also proved that if I went in and ploughed my ground to control that cover crop, I'd lose 2% organic matter, because Andy Neal's done the trials already. So the porosity, by doing that tillage, yes, it goes through the roof when we first do the tillage, but then it comes right back, and mine is got better porosity by not disturbing it. And I don't want to disturb those fungal networks. Fungi is so delicate. It's when you put a plough through, and I love what Ian's doing, so I'm not knocking Ian, but I can't do all the wood chip that he does on my scale, so I don't want to disturb my soil. We're both going in the same direction, and I'd love to be organic. There's no two ways about it, which is why I tried the rolling and the crimping. And if I can have the right weather conditions, if you can rustle that up, I won't have to use glyphosate. It's as simple as that. But I can't guarantee that. So while I can steward glyphosate and not have it in my soil, because this trial that we're doing will prove that the biology eats that glyphosate and it's not left in my soil. If I didn't do the amendments, I'd hate it. I wouldn't be able to do it because that glyphosate would be left in the soil. So I'm trying to get that balance. I don't want to use it, but I'd sooner use it than disturb and have all that carbon dioxide going up through ploughing, that I'd sooner keep that carbon in the soil. So we're both on the same path. We're coming from different directions. And if I can get away from it, I will. I'd love to. But at the moment, I can't.
Maybe it's a question that highlights the challenge of the spectrum that the word regenerative covers, which I'm assuming is why you defer from the word.
It's being used too much. When I started off, it was conservation agriculture, and now, some of the talks I've been in today, regen is being diluted and diluted and diluted by big corporate industry, and they're not doing regen at all. And it really infuriates me because it's diluted. The public will be confused. They don't know what they're eating. They're still eating a load of crap in many cases, and it's just not right.
Question at the back, and then I feel like we should take another one online, please, Johnny.
Hiya. Just wanted to say thanks very much for both speakers. I think personally you're both quite exceptional, which worries me. Do you think you have to be exceptional to achieve the results that you've achieved? Is this scalable nationally?
That's a genius question.
Well, that's a difficult one to answer. I don't know what is exceptional. I think in my case, exceptional is having done it for such a long time. No, you don't need to be exceptional. You need to have a very clear understanding or an empathy, if you like, for nature. You need to understand how nature works. You don't need to be an expert. You need to know something about it. You need to know a bit about soil, but you don't need to know everything about soil. I think there's a big danger now. We're so hung up about soil that we want to know everything. No, you don't need to know everything. But you need an empathy for nature. You need an empathy for the environment. And you need to be able to think about how the soil would like to be treated if it was you. So it's really about feelings and sentiment as much as it is anything else. Experience, of course, is a wonderful thing, and a very hard-gained thing to achieve as well. So education education would be key to that part of that exceptionality you need to have. If that makes any sense.
I totally agree with that. I'm not exceptional. I'm just passionate about what I do. I care. And if you care about your soil and care about the food you're doing, you'll meet the right people. And one thing I love about the journey I've been on, I've met some wonderful people. And all people want to do is help you. The right true caretakers and growers of the land. All we want to do is help one another and take everybody forward. It's not a competition, and you don't need to get worried that, oh, I'm not there yet, I'm not there. Where's there? There doesn't exist. It's all about doing what you're comfortable with and enjoying the journey, because that's what life's all about, is the journey. And if you can enjoy that journey, it's just fantastic.
We could get a question from online, please, Johnny, and then I haven't taken one from the balcony because I haven't seen anyone, so if you do have one in the balcony, please wave, obviously.
Cool.
So Anne-Marie asked, she said, you've both given some examples of data you've collected that show the system is beneficial, but what data do you both think is most convincing for farmers who are thinking of converting?
Could we maybe get that end bit repeated?
Sorry, yeah, of course. So what data do you both think is most convincing for farmers who are thinking of converting?
What data is most convincing for farmers wanting to convert?
I mean, everyone's hung up on carbon, of course. I mean, this is a big buzzword of the modern agricultural age. It certainly helps to know, what your carbon is, but what you have to understand is you're not going to see any big changes for almost geological time spans. So if you want to measure your carbon level in soil, great. You need to do that. You need to have that point of reference to go back to. But you're not going to keep going back there every year and get any sensible results, because it doesn't change that quick. It changes very, very slowly. So it's a really hard one to measure. I think the greatest measure was the earthworm population. The actual physical biodiversity you can see. Tim's got birds, we've got earthworms and some birds as well. Stuff you can see, stuff you can understand. I think too much in the soil is difficult to understand. It's abstract and you can't see it. So it needs to be something simple that farmers and growers can easily understand and read without spending huge amounts of money and huge amounts of time. Earthworms, biodiversity, they're easy to see, easy to monitor. Was that the answer to the question?
Yeah, do you have anything to add?
Earthworms would be the same for me. Once you see all those earthworm casts, I mean, an easy one to do if you get a square metre quadrant, and last year I got all the casts and weighed them. My worms had moved something like 35 tonne per hectare in a 6-week period, and the whole soil is alive, and that feel-good factor. But money's the one that converts most people, but if you go on a regen farm, I'm yet to meet an unhappy regen farmer, unless they were just born bloody miserable, because there's nothing not to like.
Is there anything that you guys wish you could more easily and robustly measure because you think you would find it helpful?
Infiltration rates and worm counts, because an infiltration rate's very easy. Get a tube and just pour it in, and mine probably went from 3 minutes per inch to now 18 seconds this summer, and that was Becky from Farm Carbon Toolkit doing that. And that's just a very quick one that sees the porosity, the aggregation. It's opened up, and that water's going in, not going into our rivers and polluting and flooding everywhere. It's held in the soil where it belongs.
Right, more questions, please. We'll take, you super key. Oh, and I forgot you earlier. We'll take two at the front.
Yeah, I'm just wondering how much of what you have learned and have been practicing is being implemented as part of national policy. Do you have a channel through which you can pass this on? Are you heard?
Yes, heard by a very small minority, of course. I mean, this is a problem. I mean, dissemination of this information is not easy. Farmers are not very common anyway. We represent a tiny part of the population. It's really difficult getting this information out to people. It really is. I mean, personally, we get a lot of farm walks. I get several thousand people a year come to see what we do. Some of those people take that information away with them. Some of that gets transferred. But, the progress is very, very slow. And I would like to see much greater uptake of the technologies that we are both employing on our farms. Agriculture doesn't always move very fast unless there's a big financial incentive. There's no big financial incentives in anything we do other than maintaining the income of our farms. We don't really have anything that's hugely marketably attractive to big funders in order to make it much easier to transmit the information out to people that we feel should be getting. Great, here we're talking to the converted, but opportunities like this don't come up that often.
I get very frustrated. I try. I do try a lot. And the SFI, to me, it's a great opportunity for people to improve their soil. But I get very despondent already. There's too many farmers that are just doing stuff to get the money. They don't understand the opportunity they've got. And I get really angry the fact that they're actually going to pay somebody not to grow any food crop at all. and then we're going to import our food. What right have we got to rob that country of their water and their food? And they don't pay the indigenous people. They bring their own people in to grow it. And then we give ourselves a pat on the back for being green. It's just not right. It just really makes my blood boil, that does. We haven't got the right to do that. We can grow our own food, and we shouldn't be robbing other countries. And the government needs, I've proved I can produce food and improve my soil at the same time. And that's what it's all about. It's not about taking years off or planting loads of forests and then importing our food from somewhere else. That's not what it's all about. We can improve the planet health and improve human health by doing it all on our own farms, and to rob another country and they suffer, it's just wrong.
I know you're both not necessarily livestock farmers, but what do you both see? Do either of you see a position for livestock in farming soil health at scale? And two, how particularly would you use livestock to come out of the fertility catch crop, whether it's the cover crop or the clover, and then killing that to get back into your cash crop?
I don't know, do you have livestock? Right, okay, we've got 2 livestock-free farmers here, which is quite unusual. As many of you know, I've not had any livestock on my farm for almost 4 decades. And clearly, in the practical sense, we can show quite clearly, with lots of data to back it up, that we do not need livestock to maintain soil health. There's no question of that. It's been working fine. I'm not anti-livestock. I am vegetarian. I'm not anti-livestock. I do see a very small place for livestock in agriculture, which is going to be very, very much less than it is now. I mean, all the big organisations that come out, all the big food-related researchers of the last 10 years have come up with a single one most important factor. We have to reduce livestock if we're going to reduce the pressure on the planet and if we're going to feed more people. Inevitably, we are going to see less livestock on farms. I have no doubt about that at all. It's already starting to happen. So we're going to have to get used to, A, eating a lot less livestock, and B, getting used to farming without them, which I am absolutely convinced we can do. There is no practical reason at all why we need livestock. I've got 15 million worms per hectare. That's my livestock. But I am a realist. I'm not going to think everybody's going to become vegan tomorrow and all the livestock's going to disappear. That's never going to happen. There's always going to be livestock. There will always be a place for small numbers of livestock. If we just got rid of all the really nasty, intensive poultry and pig, that would solve a big problem straight away. So it's not about the livestock, it's more about the way it's grown. But if we're looking at regenerative farms, having one of their basic principles of having to have livestock back on the farm, I disagree with that. I think it's not sustainable. It's not sensible for many farms to be doing it either.
Yeah, I mean, if I'd got livestock, it would work really well in the system. When we used to farm sheep would work really well. I still have sheep come in on tick and graze my grassland, because I do haylage for horses as well, which I forgot to say. We're just north of Wolverhampton, big equine market, and I rotate the grass around the farm, which works really well. I do herbal lays for the horses now. But what I found these last few dry springs, where I was grazing my cover crops, and I'll only ever graze 2/3, I always leave 1/3 for my underground livestock, because it's so important to have those root systems, because if you go less, you're reducing your root system so it takes longer to recover. And what I found where I'd graze cover crops rather than crimping, I'd open the soil up, they heated up, they dried out faster. And in these dry springs where I hadn't grazed, I was doing 5 tonnes to the hectare of beans. Where I'd grazed, I was only doing 2.5 tonnes to the hectare of beans. Now, the little bit of money I'd got from grazing just didn't stack up, so I don't graze anymore unless there's a need. If there's a need, I'll graze. It's just managing. Everything's about managing and being the observer. That's the biggest thing about farming the way I do, is being the observer and seeing what's happening. Because you see too many farmers that are farming last year, not this year. And it's just madness.
We'll take one more question from the alleyway here, and then one more question from online. And then I'm really sorry, but we've run out of time. But I'm sure Tim and Tolly will be around and you can nab them, or Tolly's not on social media, but Tim is. But yeah, so we'll take those last 2 questions, please.
Hi. If you were going to have to rejuvenate the soil on a pasture that was compacted from years of being used for making silage, and only silage, well, I've read that in a forestry paper that trees can't break through a pan. So would you just use perennial things like lupin,
Or could you use saplings and undersow them with a green manure?
Yeah, that's a really diverse question, which could take the rest of the day. I mean, first, you need to know a lot about your soil. You need to know about your geology. You need to know what soil type you have. In many cases, you will have to do some cultivation to break that up. I've taken on several fields in my life in a similar situation. They're often heavily poached, very damaged. You have to do cultivation initially, then you get a green manure in there to keep it open, and then you expand on that. So deep rooting green manures are really important. I wouldn't go into trees unless you just want to grow trees. If you want to grow trees, then you need to break the land first initially, if it's that bad. Get some green manure cover crop in there, and then maybe plant the trees. But trees on their own won't do it. And no crop can tolerate being in really compacted soil. Even things which break up soil PAM will not thrive in that situation. So this is where some tillage is almost inevitable in that situation.
Yeah, I'd have to have a look at the soil, but I'd lift it. I'd want a deep rooting cover crop. A root will go in the same direction for 72 hours, and I think you've got about 60 psi pressure. If it can't get through after that time, it goes in a different direction. So you've just got to break that pan up, get some air back in, and I'd want a full soil analysis, see what the calcium levels are like, just see what everything's working.
Great fact, I've never heard that before. Final question from online, please.
Is it working? Yeah, we're here. Final question is for Tolly, and someone asked if you could talk about your beetle banks.
Yeah, beetle banks. We have beetle banks right across the field, roughly every 50, 60 metres. There's a 2 or 3 metre wide strip of indigenous, I like to call it indigenous vegetation, so it's natural flora, some of which we sow, some of which we allow to grow. They are really important in terms of acting as a bank for insects to hang out. So when we do cultivate land, which we have to, of course, to get crop in, when we have created a desert of nothing for a period of time, insects can move into that beetle bank, do their business, and move back again. The beetle banks also connect all the hedges, the perimeter of the farm together. So we have a grid pattern across the whole farm, which is composed primarily of hedges and beetle banks. So no crop is ever more than 30 metres away from the area of biodiversity. And that's really important. So insects can recolonise those areas. Beetle banks are really easy to get going, and they're great fun. They look beautiful.
So before you show your thanks for Tolly and Tim, just a quick reminder that the Get Fair About Farming debate, which is about ensuring that farmers in the UK are paid appropriately, is happening on January 22nd. And if you've yet to email your MP and make sure that they actually rock up for it, if you could do so, that would be really appreciated. So short plug there. And now if you'd just join me in thanking Tolly and Tim for an amazing presentation.